Hello everybody, this is Chris from CSS Tricks with video screencast number 62. The topic this week, as promised earlier in the week, is going to be on advanced form styling and functionality. Forms meaning web forms, like those little things, everybody's favorites, inputs and checkboxes and radio buttons and text inputs and all that stuff. This is the demo that I put out on Monday. And so it's just a form that has a bunch of typical form elements on it. I based the theme of the form off of this old article. Let's see if I can, maybe I'll grab this and make a new tab and jump over to the blog quick and go to this demo. It's based off on this article from a month ago maybe that says, need something changed on your website, treat me like a 6-year-old, really. And the theme of the article was that sometimes those of us with clients that do client works, they'll shoot you an email and they'll say that they want something changed on their website. They'll be like, oh, it's missing an apostrophe and the word doesn't or something. And you're like, okay, where, what page, what website, who are you? You know, a lot of times, because their website is the most important thing to them, of course it's important to us too, but we have other clients and we can't always read their mind. It gets a little complicated, and so the theory of this article is, please, when you're sending a website, you need something changed on your website, send me an email that says a URL link to what's wrong, what needs to be changed, or let me know if it's something new that needs to be added. Tell me what it says now. Tell me what it says. Tell me what you want it to say. Does it occur in multiple places? How urgent is this request? How do I get in touch with you? All that stuff. So that's what I said in this article, that's what would be nice if clients would do that. So just as an example, I know that's not totally realistic all the time, but just as an example, I took those things that I would ideally want, and I'll say, let's make a form out of that so that a client could potentially use this form and send in that request. So I'll close that, and this is the result of that. It's called the website change request form, and it has some typical stuff. It asks for the name of someone. It asks for their email. It asks for, is this a change to existing content or is this new content? So that, these things work well as text inputs, or these things work out well as radio buttons because you can only pick one or the other. It has a drop-down menu for urgency. It has what URL. Does it appear on multiple URLs? And that's a checkbox, like does it or not? It could be a radio button as well, but this is a good example for a checkbox. You can check it, and if there are additional URLs, it slides down an area for them to include those URLs, then says what is the current text, what is the new text, and then you can send it. And you have the option of saving name and email. We're going to get to all of this. I'm just introducing the form right now. You can hit send request. So what is so advanced about all this? Well, looking at lots of different things that I consider this to be an advanced form. Pretty complex in all the different things it's doing. For one thing, since we were at the bottom, you could go ahead and hit send request. You can see some red text pop up there that are validating this form. There's a number of things that are required on this form for it to be entered. So someone can't just pop in here, enter nothing, hit send, and get us an email. That send button doesn't work until the form is validated. So that's one of the things that's kind of advanced. This particular form requires 4 things. It requires your name, email, the URL of the page, and the new text. Those are the things that are required. The urgency would be required, but you can't not pick something. And you can't not pick a radio button. So those aren't required because they have a value no matter what. This is using, I'll just be upfront. This is all of this is leveraging the power of jQuery, which we're going to get to all that. But instead of writing it all from scratch, which we could do, part of the power of using jQuery is that there's so many plugins, this robust ecosystem of plugins already out there that we can leverage and use, where you're going to use 3 plugins on this thing. They're not that heavyweight, really. It's not a big deal, but why not use stuff that's already written that already does a great job? So we're gonna, we have enough to worry about as far as creating this thing, getting it to work how we want. We might as well leverage some plugins to make some of this stuff easier. This is going to be uses a plugin to deal with this validation. It uses a plugin to serialize the inputs, which I'll explain what that means in a little bit. And it uses a plugin to handle the styling. So you might have noticed right away, look at these radio buttons. Those don't look like browser default radio buttons, do they? They don't. They look nicer, really. And these inputs have nice rollover effects on them. They have an off rollover and an on state to them, which looks really nice, with little rounded corners and shadows and stuff. That's also a jQuery plugin. This drop-down menu, see how it slides up and down nicely, and this checkbox, custom graphics. The custom graphics and the custom styling of these inputs is another plugin. So we have validation, we have this form styling plugin, and then the serialization, which we'll get to what that means. That actually makes our lives a bit easier in the end. It also, it's basically called the jQuery form plugin. It deals with the serialization. Again, we're going to get to that. It also deals with the AJAX submission of these form elements. So let's go ahead and explore the whole process. I'll type my name in. It's saying at least 2 letters required. We could change that. It's just saying don't just go in here and type an X or something. We actually want to see your whole name. Email, so I'll enter my real email. You see, just the word Chris isn't a valid email address, so these are the things that the plugins make nicer for us. So that goes away once that's valid. We're going to say this is a change to existing content. Now think about those 2 options real quick. Is this a change to existing content or adding new content? If you're adding new content, the current text has no meaning. So if we click on to add new content, that goes away, because there's no current text. This is a new content, so that just goes away. Of course, this is super wicked urgent. These they always are, aren't they? We'll add in a URL, so that's not a valid URL right there. So it's validating against that and saying please enter a valid URL. It will be able to know. And once it's valid, that will go away. Is this on multiple pages? If it is, there's a spot for multiple. We'll just say no, it's not, and not put that in there, and say change. Well, this is an add new content, right? Post new blog post about advanced web styling, and it should be ready. If I hit send request now, it will indeed send that email. There's a checkbox, save name and email. So if this was going to be used in reality, if you're going to really make your clients use this, I bet some of you might, I mean, I think it's kind of cool. I wish I could force all my clients to do it. I have a feeling it would be met with a little bit of I don't know. I'm not sure I could get them all to do it, in other words, but I wish I could. I might give it a shot. Anyway, if it was really being used by clients, they might resent having to enter their name and email every single time, right? These things can change all the time, but their name and email on a single client's computer is never going to change. So why not make an option just for their benefit that says save name and email? That way the next time they come and use this form, these 2 fields will already be filled out, because chances are they aren't going to change. So it's just a nicety for them. Go ahead and hit send, and it'll go, oh, thanks. Your message has been a request. Notice how quickly and responsively that did what it did. That's because it was submitted via AJAX, which means that we did not have to do a page load to submit this form. It didn't spin and have to reload this page and go to a different URL or even stay the same URL, but it didn't have to do anything. It just all happened behind the scenes. We got the positive message back, and so we said hide the form and replace it with this message, so people have a warm, fuzzy feeling that their message has been sent, which indeed it has. We'll get to looking at the email that it generated in a little bit, but that's the functionality. If I reload this page now, you'll notice that it saved my name and email. Actually, it saved all of this stuff. That's just how browsers work. I guess that's how this Firefox is configured, is to remember these things. So if you type some stuff in here and reload the page, it's trying to be nice and not lose all that stuff for you. But if you hold shift and do a refresh, a hard refresh, it will zero out these fields like a hardcore refresh. But notice what happens with our name and email. It zeroed out everything, but our name and email stay. Because of how we've coded this thing, we're going to be saving those values as cookies, and when this page loads, it goes and looks for those cookies, and if they are present, it fills in those forms with those two things. So it beats out browsers not remembering stuff. This happens on a server level, so that these values get saved, not in the browser, but in the server. Okay, so let's look at building this thing. Like I said, we're not going to be building all of it from scratch, but rather leveraging a bunch of plugins and the power of jQuery, some of which we'll write ourselves. So let's look at the article that went out Monday that I promised I would do a screencast on, which is what we're doing now. So what's advanced about this? Blah, blah, blah. It uses plugins. The form submits to itself via AJAX. The form is validated. It saves name and email with cookies, and the form elements are serialized, which again we'll get to. It uses 3 plugins to get all this done. Let's open these up in tabs. The jQuery form plugin, JQ transform, and the jQuery validation plugin. The form plugin, I don't know. I just thought we'd show you the sites. I'm not sure what we're going to do here exactly, because we're going to be looking at our own code. But so you'll have the links for them accompanied by this screencast, so you'll be able to get to these plugins for your own interest. And the transform plugin, see, this is what a form looks like without this styling, and then after, it looks a lot like our form, doesn't it? We didn't change a whole lot. We could, but we didn't, because it already looks really good. It's a really easy thing to apply. And the jQuery validation plugin, which does a great job of doing all that stuff, like making sure the URL is really a URL and the email is really an email, and that you've actually entered a name, not just a letter, and all that stuff. So 3 plugins we're going to use. Now is the point I would find the download button and download all these and start including them on our page. I have already done this though, so we're going to jump over to Coda and look at the code as it exists for this project. I have a project file started right here live on the server. Again, we're doing it live through Coda. I use Coda a lot of times when we kind of go commando and work live. And TextMate a lot of the times when we work local. I prefer TextMate as a text editor, actually, quite a bit more. It's just that working live is so convenient. And in this case, we're going to be using PHP, some server-side code stuff going on that, unless you're running PHP locally, which, there's some steps involved in doing that, I don't even bother. I just like, let's just do it right on the server where PHP is running and all this stuff is going to work. So here's the project file. We have an index.php file. That's it as far as, markup. A CSS folder that just has a couple of CSS files in it. One of them is our own custom styling, and one of them is the JQ transform CSS. I just left that alone pretty much. That comes with that transform plugin that deals with, making those inputs look nicer, replace those radio buttons and all that. So this is our custom stuff, and this came from the plugin. And then the JavaScript file, we're using the jQuery library, but we're going to load that right from Google like I like to do, save us some bandwidth and all that good stuff. Then there's the form plugin, the transform plugin, the validation plugin, and then our own custom JavaScript down here. So there's 4 JavaScript files that accompany this. This is rather advanced, isn't it? I think so. So this is the top of the markup. Typical stuff, declaring a content type, a title. We're linking out to the 2 CSS files I just showed you. We're loading the jQuery library in. Okay, of course, remember you load jQuery before you load all the plugins. That happens all the time in the forums of people that trying to load a plugin before they load the library and seeing errors. And then our own custom JavaScript. All of this stuff linked externally We're doing real good. We can pat ourselves on the back for keeping our design and our functionality away from the markup itself as best we can. And then we start the body and the markup for this form. So all forms are wrapped in form tags. It has a method. We're going to do a get. That's fine. It has an ID so we can target things inside of it. But importantly, it has an action URL. That's what happens. That's the URL or the file that it hits after this form has been submitted. Ultimately, we're going to be kind of hijacking the action of this form with JavaScript, but having it there is important. When JavaScript is off, this form will still work. So the location of this, which is itself pretty much, right? This is, well, it is. This is an index.php file. The action of it is itself. So we're going to be getting to some PHP that will deal with when this file gets a GET request. What does it do with it? Anyway, it's not important if you have JavaScript on, but of course we're exercising progressive enhancement here and making sure that this form works with or without JavaScript. 3 plugins, none of them are absolutely needed for this form to actually work. Now, labels and inputs to be HTML valid, of course, need to be in divs or some kind of block level element anyway. It's one of those weird errors that you'll see sometimes when you validate your code. So we're going to use that anyway, just for the basic styling. This is how the example form comes in with that JQ transform plugin anyway. So we're gonna stick with it. Each group is kind of within its own div called row element. So each kind of group of inputs is one of these blocks. Then we have a label. It has a for attribute that matches the ID of the input. I missed that, so we should put that in there. ID equals rec name. It matches the name element as well, which is equally as important, but the for should match the ID, and each input should have a unique ID. That's how this should roll. It has a class of required. That's what the validation plugin is looking for. It's looking for this to work its magic, and then we have this weird attribute min length, which is where we could, if we, names need to be at least 5 characters or something. That's where we could put that. I just have 2 in there for now. I just want to require it at the most simple level possible. And this is where it grabs that cookie. Now we'll come back to this because we need to set the cookie before we get the cookie, right? But this basically grabs the cookie if it already exists. And I've named it something kind of, weird and unique, the website, request change form. That's a little weird of a name. I think it should be WCRF, right? Anyway, if that cookie is there, it will put the value of the cookie right here. If it's not there, it just won't put anything there. So that's how simple that is. Same thing with email. Now we get into the type of change. It's a radio button. So there's a label for a radio button, but there's also labels for each individual radio button. So it's just kind of weird how that works. This doesn't have a for attribute, but this does because it's specifically tying it to one of the radio buttons. Just one of those weird things about radio buttons. But it's pretty typical standard markup here. You don't see any, inline JavaScript or, it looks like a lot of code, but that's just how forms are. They have for attributes, they have types, they have IDs, they have names, they have values. Coding for forms is, I'd like to call it messy, but it's not really messy. Each one of these attributes has a very specific function that's important. So that's the deal. Here's a little mistake I'll catch. The fors should always match IDs. I'm hoping that ID though isn't being targeted. I better leave it for this second. I have a feeling that we're going to need to target these IDs in JavaScript later, so they kind of need to be unique. I'll do it this way. The fors should match IDs. We'll just do it like that. It's for accessibility reasons. There's a drop-down menu. So, we don't need to step-by-step through all this like we have been all the way down the page, but you get it that there's just labels and typical form elements that are marked up in very typical ways, just like any other form you'll ever see anywhere. It's just when the JavaScript gets involved and the PHP gets involved when this starts getting interesting. So I'll save our little things there. Another thing that somebody mentioned in the comments on Monday was that those required fields should have asterisks, some kind of visual indication that those things are required. That's one thing that I should have done in here. I guess the asterisk could belong right there. Just so you can see us working live here, I will go back to the demo and reload it. It has an asterisk. I might make it red or something a little more visually powerful, but asterisks are the typical standardized, if you see it on a form it means that field is required type of thing. Okay, so let's take a look at the JavaScript that makes this thing happen. I don't think the CSS, this is the CSS Tricks podcast, and we just glaze over the CSS. Maybe we should take a peek at it a little bit. We can use Firebug for a lot of the peeking stuff. We'll hit inspect and look at what labels are doing. Labels have a set width and they're floated to the left. That's what gives us this kind of two-column approach here. And because they're floated, then I clear the float in between, or each div that contains a group of element and label clears, so there's no big mistakes there. I'm just not sure there's not too much going on here with CSS that's just, completely fascinating. What's more interesting here is the JavaScript and the PHP that makes all this stuff tick. I'm going to have to do a blog post one of these days that says, the website is called CSS Tricks, but I've kind of stopped doing stuff on, not stopped doing stuff on CSS, but we'll talk about what's interesting and how to get it done on the web, and it doesn't necessarily have to do with CSS every single time, even though CSS is still my favorite. I still love doing stuff on it. It's just not always what needs to be talked about for each thing. What's most important to us, so we're not even going to look at the code that creates these plugins. I mean, that would be interesting, of course, but we're just linking them up and letting them do their things. Let's look at the JavaScript that we need to write to make this thing happen. So let's kind of ignore everything down here for now, because that's kind of specialized stuff. We will get to that. But this is basically the JavaScript right here in this blue block that I have highlighted that handles 90% of everything that we want to do here. We're going to target the element on the page with an ID of change form. That's this form. And what are we going to do with it? We're going to invoke the JQ transform method. That's what this plugin does for us. And it does all that stuff. It replaces the text, the checkboxes with custom graphics and the radio buttons with custom graphics. Let's real quick see how that works. I'll Firebug it open, and I'm going to drill down and find this. You see the input is still here. This is the input that we wrote in our markup, but all of a sudden it has display none on it. We didn't put display none on it. This plugin applied display none on it. There it is if I take that off. But it's hiding it on purpose, and it's replacing it with this anchor element. This anchor element has a secret background image. Well, it's not a secret, but it hides the browser default and puts a new element right next to it, and that new element we can style however we want. It's just an anchor link. It sets display block. It has a width and a height. It has a background image on it. See the custom background image there? And then when we click it and change it, it just changes the background image. And it also changes the input behind the scenes, but it doesn't matter. You can't see it. It does matter ultimately when the form gets submitted. But, I hope that kind of makes sense. That they attach click handlers to this new event that it created, and when you click it, it changes the input, but the input is hidden. So it's just a way to make custom graphics. We could have wrote that from scratch. It's not that difficult, but this thing just does it for us, and it's nice. So That's how that works. For these, it does the same thing for checkboxes. See there, it inserted this anchor element checkbox, and when you click it, it changes the value of the checkbox. I wonder if we can see this. Checkboxes are kind of funky like that and don't necessarily have a value until you actually submit the thing, and then it's just on or nothing. Checkboxes are kind of weird. For these text areas, it leaves the text area there in the middle on top, because it has to be, because you need to see the things that you type into it, but it wraps it in a table. You know, look at all this gross markup required to do this, but it doesn't matter. It's not necessarily in our markup. It's just getting appended magically behind the scenes from JavaScript, and it deals with all these custom graphics that surround it. So this thing we can resize it in our CSS, and this table will auto-magically wrap it and apply all these custom graphics. And yet it works wonderfully. Same thing with the text inputs. So okay, that's the first line, a single line of code in our JavaScript for this change form, invoking this plugin, and it just works its magic. Okay, and then we call one other function on the form, and that's validation. And this validate function comes from our validate plugin, and we're passing it a parameter of the submit handler. So the submit handler will only kind of fire off when it's been validated, when the form passes all these validation things. So this function that's a part of it will only fire off once the form has passed validation. So what do we want to do after it's passed validation and the submit button has been clicked? We want to submit it. So this is that third plugin we call the form Ajax submit, which this function right here, just when it fires off, it will submit the form to the action URL that we specified in the URL of the form. Upon a success, what do you want it to do? Well, we're going to target the form again and just hide it, get rid of it because it's been submitted, and then just add a little bit of code. This is where this thanks, your request has been sent. That I just added that. So I just find this amazing that this tiny little bit of code reads very easily. It was very easy to write and create. Does it all. It completely handles the submission, the styling, validation, and submission of all this form in this tiny little bit of code. This little line of code hides via JavaScript that add URLs area. Take a look at the demo. There's this input right in here that by default is off, but if we click it on, it slides down, and then you can type a value in there. We don't want to hide that with CSS, because then with JavaScript off, you'd never be able to see it. So when you have JavaScript off, we want that to be visible anyway. Jump back in the code. Now, the rest of this JavaScript, which is just as much code really, all it does is handle the sliding up and down of these things. So there's the multiple URLs checkbox. It targets it when it's clicked. If that element is checked, if the value of it is on, then slide down that area. If it's not, slide it up. So it's just watching for this checkbox, and when you click it, if the input is on, slide it down, and if it's off, slide it back up. That's what that bit of code is doing here, and you can imagine this other one does the exact same thing. The target the radio button. When you click it, look at the input. Look at the first input is what this is. And if the class, this is just my little convoluted way of figuring it out, because we're attaching the click handler to the pseudo element or whatever, to the custom graphics that were put on there, that value of that radio button will be checked if it has this exact class name, because that's just how this plugin works. So that's our way of seeing if that first radio button is on or off. If it's on, slide down or hide the area. Well, let's take a look. If it's looking at this one. So if this one if change is on, we should which stands for change to existing content, then this current text content is valid. We're asking what it currently says, so we need to see it. If it's off, it slides that thing up. So that's what that code does. So if it's checked, we don't need to see it. Well, whatever, it works, right? I had me backwards confused for a second, but clearly it's functional and working. So not very much code here, and a lot of this is just little simple touch stuff, but the workhorse is just this little bit of code at the top, which I think is amazing. We do need to look at the submission, the PHP part, the actual mail handling. What this doesn't do for us is send an email to an email address. JavaScript, I don't believe, can do that. That needs to be a server, because JavaScript is a client-side, browser-side language, and we need a mail server. We need a real web server to be sending email. So that's PHP is going to handle that. And so this AJAX submit function does the submission, and the URL that it submits to is the action URL from our form. So what we didn't look at here is we started this right here, but you can see my scroll bar here. There's actually a bunch of PHP code up and above this that handles all that stuff. So let's take a peek. Not too much. Might look a little overwhelming, but believe me, it's not that big of a deal. So the first thing this PHP file does is look and see if there a certain variable is passed to it. And I just kind of picked one at random, URL-main. That's URL of page, see the name of this attribute on this particular input is URL main. So when this gets submitted, that goes along with it, and I just kind of picked one at random that says if that variable is set, then that basically means that when this page is being loaded, that we're trying to send information to it. We're basically in a scenario where this particular file is being loaded in the capacity that we are trying to send an email here. So if that's the case, then do all this stuff, and if it's and then die, which we'll get to in a minute. If that's not the case, then don't do any of this PHP stuff up here and just load the page. That's how we are able to keep this all in such a one nice little succinct file. We're able to submit to itself and just keep all the functionality in one file. It's just one way to do it. So that's what this first line is. The very second line is checking for the save stuff. What is save stuff? That's that checkbox at the way bottom, even below the submit. That's a checkbox. So the name of this checkbox is save-stuff. So when this gets submitted, we'll be able to check for the save stuff parameter, which is what's going on here. If that is equal to on, which means you clicked that button because you want to save your name and email, then set two cookies. Set one called name, set one called email, set it to the value of the name and the email, and set it to a time. This is basically a year. It's 60 seconds times 60 minutes times 24 hours times 360 days. It's just a convenient way to set days. So if I only wanted it to be half a year, I could just put 180 there, and it's a easier, more friendly way to read this calculation. Set those cookies. Remember earlier we got those cookies if they exist? That's what's going on here. Just a few lines of code here to do that. Then we need a message that we're going to start building the email that's going to be sent. We need a variable for message, which we just set to nothing, and then we're going to append things to it. That's what this dot equals is append something to this variable. We literally put in name, and then we put it, grab the variable that was submitted and plug it in there. Email, type, we're just building the content of this thing. Now, if there are additional URLs, then append it. If not, don't append it. So it's not like this URL to change line will only be present if there are URLs to change, if that checkbox was checked, in other words. So it's not like there's going to be this blank line in there if people didn't choose that. It's just not going to have that line at all. It's going to do the same thing for current text. In the situation that they're adding new content, remember this thing slides away and goes away. That means that It just won't have that line in the email, but there will always be new content, so that's there. Then this is where you get the opportunity to enter the stuff to make the form work. Where do you want it to go? I'd want it to go to myself. What do you want the subject to be, and what do you want the from email to be? A lot of times you can set the from email to, or you may want to set the from email to them, to the email that they've submitted to you. There's two schools of thought here, at least in my mind. One of them would be to put that right here. So then when you hit reply, when you get this email, it's going to reply to them and it's all square. The problem is, what if somebody puts in a really weird email, or you're getting this request for the first time from someone that you've never gotten a request from before, and something funky happens with the email? That from name can be weird with spam filters. So how I had it set up is I just did it this way. I just said it's from me. We're still going to get the information of their email, so we can just copy and paste it. But an email that's from me is much less likely to get caught in spam filters. At least that's my opinion on the subject. I'm not sure if it really matters or not, but I don't know. It seems safe to me. Then we invoke the PHP's mail function to them with this subject, with this message, and this header. And we return this that will likely never be seen unless this file is loaded directly, which would happen with JavaScript off. And then die. Just stop rendering this file. Don't bother rendering all this. We're in this mode right now where something has been submitted to this PHP file, and we know that because we checked for the presence of this variable. Then do this stuff and then just die. And if we're loading this page and nothing was sent, then start here basically and load this form. So that's the PHP that actually sends these emails and makes this a functional mail sending form. So that's basically it. I didn't write a lot of code in front of your eyes because I thought that this was going to take long enough just to explain anyway. Let me know if you like or dislike that. If you could, just by emailing me from the contact form on CSS Tricks, or obviously you can see my email right here. Send me an email if you like that. Would you prefer that I sit here and write and code all this stuff by hand? And if I do it that way, which is fine, I like doing it that way too, but I feel like we won't be able to cover as much as far as a complex tutorial like this. Maybe if I didn't ramble as much, and I know people yell at me for saying I ramble too. Just can't get it right, huh? I think that's pretty much all that I wanted to cover. I think I'll show you it actually working too. I just need to kind of clean out my email so you don't see a bunch of random stuff. Let me do that quick. So here's the form. I just filled it out, hit the button. It said, thanks, your request has been sent. And here's me checking my email over here. Website change request in the subject line. To me, from me. The type of change is presented, the urgency is presented, the URL to change is presented, and I picked add new content. So just this form is being presented there. So it's really simple email, not a lot of formatting to it, but it's got everything that you need to do this. So that's that. You remember you can download this thing for free, of course, and use it for whatever you'd like to do and change it and screw around with it. It's just there for you to learn from, no problem at all. Remember that it's PHP, so you can't run it locally and expect that email to get sent. You should upload it to a live server or run PHP locally, however you want to do that. Just be aware, if you just download it to your desktop, it probably won't run and actually send email. So that's that. More tips and tricks throughout the week at css-tricks.com. Go to the forums for help, subscribe, get all the great articles. No sponsor this week. Hasn't been a sponsor for a while. I'm not too worried about it. I just like doing the screencasts anyway. So I'm going to sponsor it myself. Again, this is my service. Service I created with a friend called Are My Sites Up. When your websites go down, shouldn't you be the first to know? Basically, there's a free plan. You can sign up, add some websites to it. If there's any troubles on those websites, you will get an email notification, or you can get an SMS notification on your phone. You'll get a text message to your cell phone if something goes wrong, if you choose to. There's a bunch of premium plans which allow you to check more sites, allow you to check those sites faster. allow you to use an iPhone application if you're an iPhone type. There's RSS feeds with the reports. You can integrate it with Twitter so you can get direct messages from them, which allows you to do fancy stuff like do quiet hours on your cell phone. If you like the SMS messages but don't want to shut it off while you're sleeping, you could use the Twitter integration for that. You can use keyword search, which scours your page for certain keywords, which is a really advanced way to make sure that your websites are up. And this is a way that you can support me and you can support CSS Tricks, and the creation of these screencasts and everything is to sign up for one of these premium plans really, really cheap. Even the basic standard plan gets you the iPhone app, gets you faster site checking, $25 for a year, which is $1 a website a year, which is pretty cheap and can save your bacon, as one of our users put it recently. It's not for you, it's for clients. You're working on a website for a client. They wake up some morning and try to go to their website and it's down and you had no idea, and you get an email from them wondering what's up. That's not good. You should be on top of it. You should be the first one to know if one of your clients' websites goes down so you can figure it out. Maybe there's nothing you can do about it right that second, but a lot of times there is. Restart the server, see what's going on with MySQL, contact the host right away, see if they're having troubles. You should be on top of it, not don't let your clients find out first and get mad at you that way. This helps you stay on top of that thing as a designer. So check out aremysitesup.com. Until next time, folks, see you later. Bye.